finally, our fourth learning objective, thinning reinforcement. Once students start showing success, it's time to shift from frequent reinforcement to more natural, sustainable support. In this section, we'll walk through how to gradually reduce reinforcement without losing progress, and how to do so in a way that respects each student's individual needs. Thinning reinforcement is an essential strategy that helps students move from relying on frequent rewards to performing behaviors more independently. Thinning isn't something we do randomly. It's a natural next step when students are responding well to a reinforcement schedule. After teaching a behavior using frequent reinforcement, like giving a reward every time a student participates or stays on task, we can start reducing how often that reinforcement happens. This helps shift students away from expecting immediate rewards and toward internal motivation or longer-lasting habits. The process of thinning is guided by the same types of reinforcement schedules we've already talked about. Instead of giving reinforcement every time, we stretch it out either by time, interval, or number of responses, ratio. This shift helps students maintain their behavior even without constant reinforcement, which is critical for their success across different times and settings throughout the school day. Thinning reinforcement typically focuses on two primary methods: interval thinning and ratio thinning. Interval thinning involves increasing the time between reinforcement as the student becomes more consistent in engaging in the target behavior. This process helps ensure that the student can maintain the behavior over longer periods without needing immediate reinforcement after each instance. The time interval between reinforcements is gradually lengthened to encourage sustained behavior. For example, if a student is being reinforced every 5 minutes for staying on task, interval fading would involve increasing that time gradually to 10 minutes, then 15 minutes, and so on, until the student can independently maintain the behavior without frequent reinforcement. Ratio thinning refers to increasing the number of responses the student must make before receiving reinforcement. This process reduces the frequency of reinforcement by requiring more effort or behaviors before a reward is given. Ratio fading helps students build persistence and maintain the behavior over time without relying on continuous rewards. For example, if a student receives a reward after every completed task, continuous reinforcement, ratio thinning might involve changing the schedule to reinforce after every second task, fixed ratio 2, then every third task, fixed ratio 3, and gradually moving to a variable ratio schedule, where reinforcement occurs after an unpredictable number of responses. Thinning reinforcement works best when it is done systematically and based on student performance. Here are the 5 key steps to help you effectively thin reinforcement while maintaining strong, consistent behavior. The first step in the thinning process is to clearly define the behavior you want to reinforce. The target behavior should be specific, observable, and measurable. For example, a teacher might decide to reinforce a student for staying seated during independent reading time for at least 10 minutes without engaging in disruptive behavior. Once the target behavior is identified, it provides a clear focus for the reinforcement process. In the early stages, step 2, it's essential to provide frequent and immediate reinforcement to encourage the target behavior. This can be done using a continuous reinforcement schedule, where the student is reinforced after every instance of the desired behavior. For instance, the teacher might give a sticker every time the student stays seated for 5 minutes. This continuous reinforcement helps establish the behavior and strengthens the student's understanding of the connection between the behavior and the reinforcement. Once the student demonstrates consistent engagement in the target behavior, in step 3, the teacher begins to thin the reinforcement gradually. This can be done either by increasing the time interval between reinforcements, interval thinning, or by increasing the number of behaviors required before reinforcement is given, ratio thinning. In interval thinning, the teacher increases the amount of time that must pass before reinforcement is delivered. For example, if the student has been reinforced for staying seated for 5 minutes, the teacher might first increase this duration to 7 minutes, then 10 minutes, and so on. This helps the student maintain the behavior over a longer period without constant reinforcement. In ratio thinning, the teacher increases the number of responses required before reinforcement is delivered. For example, if the student was initially reinforced every time they finished 1 page of reading, the teacher might change the schedule to reinforce every second page fixed ratio of 2, then every third page, fixed ratio of 3, and so on. This gradually reduces the frequency of reinforcement while still reinforcing the behavior intermittently. In step 4, it is essential to continuously monitor the student's progress to determine whether the fading process is working. If the student consistently engages in the target behavior and stays on track, the teacher can gradually increase the time between reinforcement or the number of required responses. For example, the teacher may shift to a variable ratio or variable interval schedule, where reinforcement is less predictable and more spread out. If the student's performance begins to decline, such as no longer staying seated for the full 10 minutes, the teacher should adjust the thinning process to avoid ratio strain. This might mean temporarily increasing how often reinforcement is provided, such as returning to a continuous schedule to reestablish the behavior. Once the behavior stabilizes again, the teacher can resume thinning the schedule. Remember not to increase the reinforcement requirement too quickly. As a general reminder, avoid more than doubling at any step to ensure continued success. Once you've decided to begin fading, in step 5, it's essential to monitor the student's progress closely. While independence in behavior may be the ideal goal for some students, it's important to recognize that for certain students, complete independence might not always be a realistic or achievable goal. In these cases, it's crucial to adjust the thinning process to match the student's capabilities, while focusing on helping them improve their behavior within the context of their individual needs and abilities. For example, if a student is unable to achieve full independence in a certain task, instead of aiming for complete self-sufficiency, the goal could shift to a level of increased self-regulation or reduced reliance on teacher prompts. The thinning process may then be more gradual or involve less significant reductions in support. By adjusting expectations and ensuring that goals are realistic and attainable, teachers can ensure that progress is still being made in a way that promotes growth and development. The pace at which thinning occurs should be individualized and based on consistent observation of how the student is responding. In some cases, more frequent reinforcement may be necessary, or the reduction in prompts or support might need to be slower to accommodate the student's learning style and emotional regulation. Adjusting the pace of thinning based on the student's response not only helps maintain a positive learning environment, but also encourages a sense of achievement and motivation without overwhelming the student. Now, let's look at a real-world classroom example of how reinforcement can be gradually thinned to promote lasting behavior change. Her teacher, Mr. Lopez, wanted to encourage her to share her thoughts verbally, so he started by giving verbal praise and a participation point every time she raised her hand and contributed. At first, Maya responded well, raising her hand almost every day when she knew the answer. Once Mr. Lopez noticed her doing this consistently, he began thinning the reinforcement by giving her a participation point every other time she contributed, while still providing verbal praise each time. Later, he moved to a variable ratio schedule, sometimes giving the point after 2 comments, sometimes after 3 or 4 to make the reinforcement less predictable but still motivating. He also introduced other social reinforcers, like having Maya lead a small group discussion, which she found rewarding. Maya continued to participate regularly, and eventually, Mr. Lopez stopped tracking participation points but maintained positive feedback and classroom recognition. Maya had internalized the value of participating and felt more confident contributing without external reinforcement. This example shows how reinforcement can be used intentionally, then gradually thinned, to build lasting, self-sustaining participation without relying on constant rewards. Consider the following questions as you reflect on how reinforcement was introduced and gradually thinned in Maya's case. 1. What kind of reinforcement did Mr. Lopez use? 2. How did he thin the reinforcement without removing encouragement? 3. Why do you think Maya responded well to the combination of social and token reinforcement? 4. What could Mr. Lopez have done if Maya had stopped participating during the thinning process? 5. How might this strategy look different for a student who is more impulsive or tends to dominate discussions? Take a moment to reflect on each question and consider how similar strategies could be applied in your own classroom. You've now explored some of the most powerful tools in behavior change reinforcement, preference assessments, reinforcement schedules, and thinning strategies. To recap, reinforcement is most effective when it's function-based and delivered intentionally. Preference assessments help ensure that reinforcement is actually meaningful to the student. The right reinforcement schedule depends on the behavior, the student, and your goals, whether that's teaching a new skill or maintaining one. Thinning reinforcement over time helps students build independence and sustain behavior across different settings. Most importantly, reinforcement isn't one size fits all. It's an ongoing process of observing, adjusting, and responding to student needs. Thank you for engaging in this module. Your efforts make a real difference in creating supportive, responsive learning environments for all students. For this month's assignment, please refer to the detailed instructions provided in Canvas. Take a moment to review both the assignment guidelines and the rubric to ensure you understand how your work will be evaluated. As a reminder, to comply with the FERPA, do not include any personally identifiable information in your submission. For this month's assignment, you will complete the response section of Step 5 in the BIP State Form. In addition, you will incorporate reinforcement strategies into Part 3 of the Behavior Goal Planning Form. Before starting the assignment, take a moment to review Step 4 in the BIP State Form. This section focuses on how the replacement behavior will be taught and reinforced. Reflect on what we've covered in this month's module. How will the replacement behavior be reinforced? How will the student get their need met immediately in a more appropriate way? Use this time to revise or clarify any parts of your plan before moving on to Step 5. For the main part of this month's assignment, you'll complete the response section of Step 5 in the Behavior Intervention Plan. Use what you've learned in this module to clearly describe how adults should respond to the behavior in a way that is supportive, consistent, and aligned with the overall plan. As you complete Step 5, Response, be sure to use the TATE rubric to guide your responses. The second monthly assignment focuses on Part 3, Plan to Teach, systematic instruction in the Behavior Goal Planning Form. You will complete the reinforcement section within the Steps Phases area. Be sure to review the reinforcement rubric for the Behavior Goal Planning Form to make sure all required components are clearly addressed. Learning Objective 4 complete. Click Next.